Hi, this is Ashwati from Unity Women's College, Manjeri. The current session is on The Stone Angel, a novel by Margaret Laurence. Set in the late 19th century West Canada till the end of the Great Depression of 1930s, the novel, titled as The Stone Angel, narrates the story of Hagar Shipley, a 90-year-old lady, lived with Marvin and Doris, her son and daughter-in-law. The incidents depicted in the novel took place in Manawaka, a fictional town as Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha, Hardy's Wessex, or R.K. Narayan's Malgudi. Manawaka is a mythical territory mapping the universal human experience and a Scot-Canadian subculture in the Canadian West. Though the novel gives a clear picture of the life in the wilderness of Canadian prairies, it carries some universal aspects too. In the collection of essays titled Heart of a Stranger, published in 1976, the writer of the novel, Margaret Laurence, mentioned about what the world can relate to in her portrayal of Hagar Shipley, the central character. If Hagar in The Stone Angel has any meaning, it is the same as that of an old woman anywhere, having to deal with the reality of dying. On the other hand, she is not an old woman anywhere. She is very much a person who belongs in the same kind of prairie Scot Presbyterian background as I do. And it was, of course, people like Hagar who created the background with all its flaws and its strengths. Now, a few facts about Margaret Laurence, the writer. Margaret Laurence, a Canadian writer, born on 18 July 1926 at Neepawa, Manitoba, and died on 5 January 1987 at Lakefield, Ontario, appeared to have considered realism as a central vehicle to manifest her thoughts through fiction. She believes that the articulation of real-life experience in fiction would automatically make it as instrumental in conveying historical information to some extent. She began her literary career as a journalist and later dedicated herself to creative writing. Interested both in Africa and Canada, she published works portraying the peculiarities of both countries. However, her primary interest always resided in Canadian subjects, in which she laid her focus. Her first novel, This Side of Jordan, published in 1960, was set in Africa, dealt with the intricacies of power exchange happened when Ghana was set free. The Prophet's Camel Bell, a memoir of Somaliland, published in 1963, is remarkable for its vivid and witty descriptions of the desert, to where the young Laurence had undertaken a journey along with her husband. The Tomorrow Tamer, a short story released in the same year, the gem of which is derived from her encounter with an African bridge worker in Gold Coast, won the President's Medal of Excellence. In 1966, A Just of God, showcasing the life of school teacher, received the prestigious Governor General's Award. Whether it is The Fire Dwellers, published in 1969, or The Diviners, published in 1976, her works raise fundamental queries on cultural questions and human predicament. Her memoir, Dance on the Earth, was published posthumously. The Stone Angel came out in 1964, was the first novel in her Manawaka series. The novel is to be read as the one manifesting the subjectivity of an old woman and the problems that her little idiosyncrasies caused to herself and the family. The title of The Stone Angel is oxymoronic. It places a stubborn stone against the soft angel. The title suggested the seemingly conflicting characteristics of the personality of the central character, Hagar. The object, the stone angel, was a statue erected in the memory of the protagonist's mother, which symbolizes the blindness of pride and represents the family's respectability. The stone angel belongs to a tradition of sculpture stretching back from the Counter-Reformation to Roman Hellenic times. It roams above the pettiness as well as the heroism of human lives and was intertwined with the destinies of Hagar, her father, and her sons. The monument indicates futility of living and death in life. There are some theological references existing in relation to the name Hagar. Hagar, also spelled Agar in the Old Testament, was Abraham's concubine and the mother of his son Ishmael. Purchased in Egypt, she served as a maid to Abraham's childless wife, Sarah, who gave her to Abraham to conceive as an heir. When Hagar became pregnant, her meek manner changed to arrogance. With Abraham's reluctant permission, Sarah treated her so harshly that she fled into the wilderness. There, by a spring of water, she was found by an angel of the Lord who told her to return home and promised her that she would have many descendants through a son, Ishmael. This stated Encyclopedia Britannica. As per New World Encyclopedia, Hagar is quite important in Islam as the mother of Ishmael and all the Arab people from which descended Muhammad. In the Quran, part of the story of Hagar and Ishmael takes place in Mecca. Now the relationship between Hagar and other characters. Hagar Shipley, the protagonist of the novel, a 90-year-old lady, lived with Marvin and Doris, her son and daughter-in-law. Hagar was the daughter of Jason Curie. Hagar's father was born in Scotland. He was an authoritarian and disciplinarian type. She had two brothers, Matt and Daniel. Among them, Daniel fell through ice and died of fever at the age of 18. Auntie Dolstone House, another character in the novel, was Jason Curie's housekeeper who acted as Hagar's surrogate mother. Hagar married Bramford Shipley, a widower, and had two children, John and Marvin. Hagar loved John most, who died in an accident. John loved a lady named Arlene Simons, whose mother was Lottie Dracer, the childhood friend of Hagar. Hagar was against this relationship. Hagar lived with Marvin and Doris, who decided to take her to a nursing home and sell their home due to economic crisis. Hagar, when left the home of the son, met a man named Murray Lees in the cannery, whom she felt as John in her fantasies. The other characters in the novel include Tina, the granddaughter, Stephen Shipley, grandson, Jess Shipley, Bram's daughter in his marriage with Clara, Mr. Troy, the minister whom Hagar visits and with whom she shares her memories, and Sarah Wong, who shares the room with Hagar in the hospital. Now, here comes the analysis of Hagar Shipley as the protagonist of the novel. Hagar is proud about the significance of her Scottish roots. The Curie legacy of clan, nobility and self-made success created a rigid, adamant and self-righteous figure out of the protagonist. But life has made her to lead a middle-class life. However, she rejected her Shipley legacy, though she had concerns towards the marginalized. Hagar was essentially rebellious in nature, and her son Marvin says about her as a holy terror. But in fact, her life was the one torn by the men in the story, her father, husband, and sons. Hagar was a detached participant in any community, and her exile was more or less a self-conscious one. A striking point about Hagar was that she was blind both to her needs and that of others. Still, she has a strong sense of justice and knowledge about ethics. Hagar's portrayal reveals to the audience about the wishes of old age. She spoke for herself, and the rhetoric is about her capacity to have positive qualities. She functions as a touchstone for the writer to understand about the social attitudes. Though was rigid, Hagar shows consistency of behavior throughout the novel. Here is an example of a poignant poetic description from the novel which speaks more of Hagar. Quietly I lay the paper down, my hands dry and quiet on its dry pages. My throat too is dry and my mouth. As I brush my fingers over my own wrist, the skin seems too white after the sunburned years, and too dry, powdery as blown dust when rains failed, flaking with dryness, and as an old bone will flake and choke, left out in a sun that grinds bone and flesh and earth to dust, as though in a mortar of fire with a pestle of crushing light. Coming to designs and techniques of writing of the work, one could see that this is a work written in the stream of consciousness pattern. Old age was often subjected to stereotyping in literature. Here lies the significance of the stone angel, the protagonist of which is not a flat character at all. She is indeed a round character. Two dimensions of looking at life, a life lived and life looked upon, were subjected to the examination in the work, which utilized, as I told you earlier, the technique of stream of consciousness to tell the story in flashback, first person narrative mode through the voice of Hagar Shipley, the narrator. The novel was developed through two aspects of a single story. On the one hand, it depicts the crisis of the present, that is, Hagar's confrontation with the brutal facts of old age. And on the other, the narrative takes us through the phases of her life, childhood, marriage, and motherhood. Mixing the past with the present and following the non-linear format of memories, the writer presented an autobiographical frame of the story. The flow of the memories was often interrupted with the encroaching present. Through the confident narration of Hagar, the writer kept the novel far away from the pathetic story of an old woman with a tragic end. The novel is an open-ended work, so to speak. The next area is whether the novel can be read as feministic work. The novel was written in a confessional narrative mode. Maintaining the female subject position, the novel not only spoke about a woman but spoke on her behalf too. Even while criticizing Hagar Shipley of her adamant nature, biases and prejudices, one cannot undermine how she was crushed by patriarchal men. Her relationship with men was indeed strained. She confronted the issues like inability to form meaningful relationship with partner and sons, irresponsibility and exploitation from the part of the husband, and the problems of communication with the world. Also, the novel emphasized the intricacies of motherhood. The patriarchal institution of religion too failed to offer comfort to her. Embracing the masculine values and denial of sexuality for patriarchy was what designed the character of Hagar, for which she alone cannot be blamed. The work is definitely an example of a creature feminine. The major themes of the work. Hagar is an undefeatable old woman. She resisted aging by becoming rigid. She was often considered as intolerant face of aged people, though at the same time she could be conceived as the best example of aged people who were denied of adequate care and respect. She was fighting against the present realities, and to some extent it was a fight against the approaching death too. Hagar's struggles are partly emerging out of her fear of loss of money and dignity. People saw her as an embodiment of pride and often failed to recognize the tormented self inside her stubborn frame. Though she strives hard for inclusiveness, she was emotionally abandoned by the rest of the people. That led gradually to the real exile of the old woman. There was a woman yearning for care inside Hagar. When we blame her as prejudiced, there is an objective thought that we forget about. That is the way how we generally treat the aged people. Is it too a part of the prejudice on the side of the young people? This is also worth exploring. Throughout her life, Hagar lived a life of crisis and familial discord. Amidst these conflicts, she was attempting to galvanize her true self against the odds. Both Hagar and others failed to communicate the real feelings either verbally or non-verbally, which led to the isolation of Hagar from the rest. Towards the end, we could see a transformed Hagar in search of understanding, self, and redemption. Her changed approach to Marvin was an evidence about this transformed state. The novel, with its unique pattern, poses fundamental queries about the issues such as class confrontation, superficial relationship, and limitations of independence. In fact, the novel discusses the crucial subject of survival of the misfits. In Technologies of Identity, the language of the incontinent body in Margaret Lawrence's The Stone Angel, Donna Pametier Penny says, "The Stone Angel is valuable precisely because it is such a representative text. It is a literary history of a phase of settlement in Canada, and its reception is a history of a phase of literary critical settlement. It parallels the status to W. L. Morton's 1957 history, Manitoba, has been amply noted, but the possible parallels between the cultural work of the novel and that of its criticism and as pedagogy remains unstudied. In the ongoing construction of a national literature, a slowly shifting edifice in which Lawrence has played a foundational role, many critics have read her Canadian work as positively representative of strong women who can be vehicles for the tenor of the coming independence of Canadian identity." Thank you very much.